This is Jeremy Adams. This is September 5th, 2013, first AP Government Review. Thank you for coming, everybody. It's good to see you. I wanted to give you guys a very, very brief roadmap of what we're going to do today. First of all, I want to talk about the exam. It's in my hot little hands here. I'm going to tell you about the structure about it. I'm going to give you some helpful hints for studying. And then I'm going to give you a summary of everything that we've done from the second day of school to our lecture today. Obviously, I go into a lot of detail, a lot of depth during class. Oftentimes we get sidetracked, perhaps. A joke here or there, a story here or there. It's going to be a very concise review. I think you'll find it helpful. But a few things to mention here. First of all, this is pretty much multiple choice, a little bit of matching, a little bit of fill in the blank, but by and large, it is multiple choice. Few things I want you guys to be aware of. First of all, how should you study for this exam? I appreciate the fact if you did your homework, but really, two places you should go for mastery. Look at the PowerPoints. There are two of them, one on constitutional foundations, the other one on federalism, and make sure you master your notes. Remember, there is a qualitative difference between familiarity with the information. Oh, I've heard of the Federalist Papers. I've heard of the Second Continental Congress. I've heard of the categorical grant. Versus, oh, not only have I heard of it, I can define it, explain it, and exemplify it. That's what you need to be able to do. Okay? Again, I have not mentioned this yet because the AP test is a long way off and it's important, but it's not the end-all be-all. That being said, students who received an A in my class last year in AP Government had a passage rate of 100%. If you got an 85 to an 89, right, only two people who got an 85 to an 89 did not pass. Over half of the people who got an 80 to an 84% passed the AP test. So how you do in the class is a profoundly valid indicator of how you're going to do in May. Again, the test in May is not the end-all be-all, but if you study hard now, it makes the final easier, it makes the AP test easier, and makes the rest of the class easier. So do the work now. Odiska atasketa. Learn or leave. Okay? Don't waste your time or mine. Let's do the work. Okay? So, when you're looking at the test, a few things that you should know everything, but there's one area in particular where I'll just tell you there's, quite a few points. And that is, make sure, a few things. One, you know the enumerated versus the reserved powers. So, in other words, know what the states traditionally do, know what the national government traditionally does, know what they both can do. Okay? That's worth 7 points right there. That's almost a tenth of the test. Right? So make sure you know that. Also, know your government daddies. I don't mean me. Who's the father of democracy? Who's the father of the country? Who is the Atlas of Independence? Right? Know those important. Who's the father of the Constitution? Know all of your government daddies, and then make sure you know the important clauses as well. Article 4, the 10th Amendment, Article 5, which is about amendment, the 9th Amendment, which I didn't talk about in class, but it's in your homework. Those are all on there as well. So know the federalism, designations. Know certain parts of the Constitution that deal with federalism, and make sure you know all about your government daddies. Okay? Now don't sit there tonight and say, okay, I did those 3 things, I'm done. No. Those are just sections of the test that you need to be aware of. Okay? Any questions for me? No? Okay, let's move on then. We began our journey of political science by looking at the place where all thinking of politics began. And that is, of course, with the ancient Greeks. And a philosophy of government called ideal politique. And the fathers of ideal politique are Plato and Aristotle, who argued that you cannot divorce the quality and ethos of a civilization from the quality and the ethos of the citizens who make up that civilization. So what they argued was this. People who are in the back, come on in. There are empty seats way down here. Don't sit in the back and scarf down food and not hear me. So come on down here. You're fine. Okay? Curtis, you're supposed to be recording me. No. Too late. Take a seat. You're fine. Don't worry. You can just use mine. At any rate, though, the idea is that we cannot be indifferent to the character, to the virtue. The Greek word for that is arete. If you want a just society, then we have to cultivate citizens who themselves are just. Absolutely. So ideopolitik is all about character and virtue. That if you want a peaceful society, if you want a just society, then character formation, education, that's what politics is in the ancient sense. Politics is not about rights and freedoms. It's about character formation so that citizens can govern themselves. Okay, so that is ideopolitik. Figuring out what human nature can be, what human behavior ought to be. Now, fast forward 2,000 years and we get to the father of realpolitik. And that was Niccolò Machiavelli, who wrote an instruction manual called The Prince. And in The Prince, Machiavelli says, look, with all due respect to the ancients, to Plato and Aristotle, it does no good to imagine princedoms that have never existed. The job of a prince who wants to rule wisely is not to figure out what human nature can be. It's not to paint a vivid picture of what people can be when they have, wings on their backs. No. The question of political philosophy is, what is human nature? Do you remember the analogy with the shirt when you're shopping? If you want clothes that fit, figure out what your size is, not what you want it to be. Same thing is true of human nature. If you want the right kind of government, strong, weak, a mix, what is human nature? What is the nature of man? And this is what essentially Machiavelli said. If human nature is really bad, you're going to need a strong form of government, right? Like a what? A monarchy, a dictatorship. If human nature is really, really good, then you can have a direct democracy where the people themselves write the laws, vote on the laws, and execute the laws. And so where we went from Machiavelli was into the early Enlightenment and Thomas Hobbes. And Thomas Hobbes uses a state of nature to answer Machiavelli's call. We give up some of our freedom in a state of nature up to a government, and that government is going to make sure that we do not have a violent death. Now, because human nature is so bad, what kind of a government does Hobbes favor? A monarchy, a strong, absolute monarchy. So he would say human nature is bad, right? And therefore you need a strong, centralized authority to quell and domesticate human behavior. Now, fast forward out of the English Civil War, which is why you get that cynical analysis, to the Glorious Revolution, and you get the guy who I think is primus inter pares, first among many, the philosopher of the Enlightenment, and that's Mr. John Locke. And John Locke argues, he agrees with Hobbes. If you want to figure out human nature, where do you look? You look at a state of nature, but a Lockean state of nature is very different than a Hobbesian state of nature. In a Lockean state of nature, human beings are essentially asocial. We don't love each other, right? We don't want to hug. That would be Jefferson or Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We don't want to kill each other. That would be Thomas Hobbes. He says in a state of nature, human beings, there's a law in nature. And remember now, who is kind of the father of the Enlightenment, I would argue? Newton. And Newton says we can figure out the laws of the universe, the physical laws, by obeying natural law, right? There's natural law. There's laws of motion, laws of thermodynamics. There's the law of universal gravitation. These laws exist independent of us, right? Newton would say we discovered these things by using reason. Again, the Enlightenment is the age of reason. So Locke says there's also a law of nature that governs not just the physical world, but also the political one. And in that political world, human beings have natural rights. They are universal. They are ubiquitous. You don't have to do anything to earn them. They are as universal as the laws of motion. Newtonian and Lockean thinking is universal both ways. But here's the problem with the state of nature, according to Locke. If you're in a state of nature, is there anything that guarantees your natural rights? No. And remember, Locke said, this is on your test tomorrow, Locke argues for a limited government. Government is not there to give you stuff. Government is not there for social services. It's not there to educate you. It's not there to do anything but protect minimal what? Natural rights. right? So if it's protecting life, liberty, or property, that's a proper function of government according to, Locke and really Jefferson. It needs to be very limited in scope. So we enter into a civil society for the protection of natural rights. And if a government is not doing it, Locke says we have a right of what? A right of revolution. Exactly. Now, take those Lockean ideas and fast forward 90 years. Now we have a situation on the east coast of the United States, right? The colonists feel as though, as subjects of the royal crown, King George III is ignoring natural law. He is not giving them and protecting their natural rights. Ergo, the colonists feel that in the spirit of the Enlightenment, they have a right of revolution. You are disobeying the laws of nature, English Parliament and King George III, and therefore justice is on our side. We have a right to revolt against you. And so, bless you. It's going to be on YouTube forever, Mr. Hawley, your sneezes. At any rate, though, so now we have this meeting, and this meeting is all over your test tomorrow. And that meeting is the beginning of America, right? And that meeting is called the Second Continental Congress. The Second Continental Congress has a lot of important people, but really the two that I focused on are Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, right? They are the heroes of the Second Continental Congress. Now, John Adams, the Atlas of Independence. What is the contribution that Adams makes in the revolutionary process? He's the one giving the big speeches. He's the one doing the politicking, keeping all 13 colonies together. He's the one, Adams is. Adams is the one doing the heavy lifting behind the scenes. Well, we all know that he gives this very famous case for independence, and eventually they vote on it, they agree to it, but you have to, this is a legal decision. We are breaking away from England. This is an act of rebellion, right? And so we need to get somebody to write a document explaining what is our justification, why are we doing it, and who is it going to be addressed to? And the name of that document, which creates America. Again, the creation of America it's not a place, it's an action. We are breaking away from England. Right? Now, I would argue that we probably don't become a unified nation until the creation and the ratification of what document? Constitution. I would argue that the Declaration broke us away from England into 13 kind of states, and that we became a nation when we became a union with the Constitution. That being said, the Declaration of Independence argues that we have a natural right, we have inalienable rights, that King George III didn't acknowledge them, and therefore we have a right to revolt. Now remember, there is a radical idea in the Declaration of Independence. And here's the idea. Being an American, then, and this is all about classical liberalism. Remember, we are a liberal, democratic republic. A basic idea of America is, if you want to be an American, we are not going to be like England and Europe anymore. In Europe, they believed that you needed a monarchy to keep you together. They needed an official established church to get you to behave. That to be a certain nationality meant speaking a language, or it meant being a certain race, or allegiance to a certain king, or praying to a certain god. Yet in America, what is Americanism based on? Is it color, creed, language, religion? What is it? It's belief, yeah. Do you believe in the proposition of the Declaration of Independence? All men are created equal. We all have a right to pursue our happiness by exercising our individual freedom. If you believe that is a God-given right, and that government exists not for you to be its subject, but to protect that right for you to pursue your freedom, then you are a what? You are an American. Doesn't matter what religion you are, what race you are, how long you've been here, you are an American. And that idea, that novus ordo seclorum, that idea is essentially what gives birth to this nation. Now, we all know that the Declaration of Independence treats government as a foreign entity. We don't like government. We don't like what it's doing. We want limited government. And so, It's like the boyfriend that we broke up with that we hated. We're going to go date somebody who is... And the articles were very weak. Remember, no judiciary. So if there was a disagreement among the states, you couldn't referee it. No executive. So even if they did pass a law, you couldn't enforce it on the states. And the legislature was ineffectual. It didn't work. In order to pass a law, you needed to get 2/3, 9 out of 13. To amend this Constitution, you needed 13 out of 13. And so it became very obvious that the economy was suffering for this. And you had two things that came up. One is this idea that we do not want to be Europe. And in Europe and European society was defined by bellicosity, which means war. All these small states in Europe, in continental Europe, constantly fought one another. Why? And how was that bad for freedom? Well, if you think you're going to have to fight a war all the time, what do you do to the army? You build them. What happens to taxes? You raise them. What happens to centralization? It's enhanced. So what happens to freedom? High taxes, you have to have a big army, freedom is squashed. And so the way that we get rid of that is instead of being 13 independent states, we unify. We become a union, right? Just as England did with Scotland in 1707, we become one country. And we really realized we had to do that because of Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion really showed us that this government is not strong enough to do anything. How are we going to deal with the Spanish in the South? How are we going to deal with the Canadians didn't exist yet. How are we going to deal with the French and the British in the North and in the West if we can't repel Daniel Shays of Massachusetts? If we need the Massachusetts militia to deal with him, how are we going to deal with the Empire of England should we have to again? So what happened was there was a call to revise the Articles of Confederation. And that results in the meeting of 1787 in Philadelphia to revise the Articles. Now remember, the most important thing about that meeting happens beforehand. To create legitimacy for that meeting, who is brought in to preside over it? Washington. And Madison, of course, has this problem. And it's called, the problem is called, by the way, what time am I out of here? 11:44? Is that right? Okay. Madison is brought in because Madison knows throughout history we have one of two problems. Either government is so strong, what does it do? It becomes tyrannical, or it's too weak and you have chaos. In a modern liberal society, you want two things. This is called the paradox of government, right? How do you balance liberty and order? And Madison has to come up with a plan. And we all know that, we look throughout history and democracies. We look at what society was a direct democracy, was a model. Greece, yeah, Athens. But did we want to be a direct democracy? No, but we like the idea of people power. We like the idea of individualism, but we don't want to be a direct democracy. We look at Rome, right, which is a republic, but we don't want to have no, participation amongst the people. So we don't want to be a pure republic either. So what does Madison do? Well, he creates a system in the Virginia Plan that has a lot of checks and balances to it. And the problem is, how do you create a country that is big, but also is a democratic republic? And there are two answers to that. Federalist Paper 10 and Federalist Paper 51. Federalist Paper 51 says the answer to that is checks and balances. Create a government that's strong enough to enforce the laws, but not so strong that it becomes tyrannical. And the other solution is very elegant, and that's Federalist Paper number 10. Federalist Paper number 10 is really important. And the idea of Madisonian pluralism, this notion that we're going to protect freedom by having a large empire. If you have a large empire, you're going to have a lot of diversity. And all those diverse people have their own what? Their own factions. They're pursuing what? Their own self-interest. Is Madison like Hobbes? Is Madison like Rousseau? Or is he right in between? He's right in between. He believes that individuals will pursue their self-interest. They'll band together as factions. And the way to make sure that one faction doesn't oppress the others is by taking in all of them. Yeah, extend the sphere. And that's why you need a Republican form of government to look out for the common good, because the everyday guy is just pursuing his self-interest. So 10 and 51 are both solutions to the paradox of government. But when Madison gets to the Constitutional Convention, The most important thing he does, besides bringing Washington along, is he makes the very first motion, which is, what's going to be our starting point? No. Let's use my plan, the Virginia plan, as what? As the starting point, which means if we're going to use my plan, ipso facto, we are throwing out the Articles. And so most of the Constitutional Convention is all about representation. Virginia plan wants a bicameral House, all based on population. The small states hate that, which is embodied in the New Jersey plan of William Patterson, who wants a unicameral of equality. Everybody gets the same votes. They fight about it, and except for Hamilton saying in a 6-hour speech, we need to have a monarchy, they come up with this grand solution, the Great Compromise, also known as the Connecticut Compromise, the Connecticut Plan, which says, can we quiet down, folks? That says that we can have a bicameral legislature. One will be based on population, that's the House, and another one based on equality, that will be the Senate. William Patterson. Yeah, the Patterson Plan. So that takes up most of the time. Once you have a House based on population, then you have to worry about what? Slavery. How are we going to count slaves? How do they deal with that? Something called the 3/5 Compromise. We're going to count slaves as 3/5 of a person, and that's how they deal with that. But then, as soon as the convention is over, the real work begins. And what is the real work? We have to ratify, yeah. The Constitution